The black car stops before a weathered shop, and a rich woman sees only junk. The mechanic says little, but the ground beneath his feet carries a secret her polished plans cannot ignore. How much does pride cost when it misreads a man? The pump was still coughing when Caleb Rourke stepped out of his truck. It came from behind the little ranch house. A dry, strained knock, rising through the morning heat every few seconds, like something old trying not to give up. Caleb stood still long enough to hear the rhythm. Then he took his tool bag from the passenger side, shut the door with his hip, and walked toward the well shed without wasting a word. By that hour, the sun had already burned the pale grass flat. A trough near the fence held only a shallow sheet of water, and the cattle stood around it with the quiet patience of animals that had no one to complain to. Caleb noticed that first. He always noticed the animals before the people, the water before the talk, the pressure before the panic. He lifted the shed latch, crouched beside the pump, and set his palm against the pipe. It trembled wrong, broken all the way, not yet, but close enough that waiting another day would have turned a repair into a replacement. He opened his bag, took out a wrench and a pressure gauge, and went to work. For men who made a show of fixing things, Caleb was not one of them. He listened, tightened, bled air from the line, watched the gauge climb and fall, then climb again with steadier force. Pump finally caught its full pull. Water rushed through the pipe with a low, clean sound. The trough valve began to fill again. Caleb stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked once toward the pasture. That was enough around that part of Texas hill country. Water was not a convenience. It was a family's morning, a herd's survival, a place's right to keep calling itself home. He wrote the bill in pencil on a small pad from his shirt pocket. Fair labor, one small part. No extra charge for the time it took to check the old line running toward the south if pasture. He folded the paper once and left it where it would be found. Then he loaded his tools, checked the time, and drove back toward his shop. The shop sat off a county road, where the pavement lost confidence and turned rough near the cattle fencing. It had been a working place for longer than most people cared to remember. Full siding was faded. The yard held old pump housings, tractor parts, cracked belts, lengths of pipe, and engines waiting for hands that still knew what to do with them. To the wrong eyes, it looked like clutter. For the right ones, it looked like inventory. Inside, the air held the smell of oil, dust, and sun-warmed metal. Caleb hung his tool bag on the same hook where it always went. On the wall behind his workbench, the large map was pinned under clear plastic, its corners held down by old washers. Lines ran across it in pencil and oil marker, some straight, some bending around property edges and dry creek beds. Beside it sat old pressure notebooks, repair tags, and a coffee can filled with stubs of grease pencils. Caleb glanced at the map the way another man might glance at a family photograph. Not sentimentally, carefully. He marked the ranch call in the notebook, added the pressure reading, and wrote the invoice total again in cleaner numbers. He checked the small clock above the parts shelf, found then the square of paper tucked near the register with the few evening errands he had not forgotten. Being a single father had made him exact with time. He did not speak of it much. He just built his days, so nothing important had to beg for space. He had just slid the notebook back under the edge of the map when he heard tires roll into the yard. Not a ranch truck, not a feed delivery. Too smooth. Caleb looked through the open bay door as a big black luxury car stopped in front of the shop. Its paint caught the hard noon light and threw it back like glass. A woman stepped out first, composed and spotless in a way that made the yard around her seem accused. A man followed from the other side, carrying a slim folder and the patient expression of someone who preferred other people to look rude first. Caleb picked up the wrench he had left on the bench, not because he needed it, but because it was there. He walked to the edge of the bay and waited. The woman looked past him before she looked at him. Her eyes moved over the stacked pipe, the old engine blocks, the shelves of fittings, the lift, the workbench, the map on the wall. Nothing in her face changed very much, but something in the air did. "You're Caleb Rourke?" he asked. "That's right. Madeline Voss." She did not offer a hand. "This is Pierce Langford. We're representing the ranch development going in west of here." Caleb's eyes shifted once to Pierce, then back to her. He heard there was a project. "A high-end ranch of resort," she said. "Private cabins, equestrian trails, event space, guided land experiences. It will bring money into the county." The words were clean, practiced, and polished smooth. Caleb had heard words like that before. They usually arrived before fences moved. Madeline took one step farther into the shop. Her heel avoided a dark stain on the concrete. "Your parcel sits at the approach we need for the main entrance. My parcel sits where it has always sat." Pierce opened the folder, but Madeline lifted 2 fingers slightly, stopping him. She wanted to speak first, prepared. "To make you an offer," she said. "A fair one, considering the condition of the property." Caleb did not ask the number. He looked past her at the black car, then at the dust settling again around its tires, and followed his glance and gave a small, controlled smile. "Mr. Rourke, I don't mean to be unkind, but from the road, this doesn't read as a business. It reads as a junkyard with a roof." The shop went very quiet. The word did not hit Caleb loudly. It landed low, somewhere beneath the ribs, where old insults and unpaid invoices and long mornings had a way of settling. His hand tightened once around the wrench, then relaxed. Pierce watched the movement. "Watch permits." He watched posted near the office door. He watched the old map on the wall and the file boxes underneath it. He was not looking at the shop the way Madeline was. He was looking for seams. Continued, her voice calm enough to make the insult sound like a business observation. "We can help you move on from all this. Cleanly. No drawn-out trouble. No unnecessary process." Caleb turned and set the wrench down on the workbench. Metal touched wood with a dull, final sound. "This shop isn't for sale." For the first time, Madeline looked directly at him as if he had answered in a language she did not expect him to know. "You haven't heard the offer." "I heard enough." Pierce closed the folder, halfway. "Mr. Rourke, people in your position would at least review the paperwork." Caleb looked at him. "Most people in my position know paperwork can say plenty and still leave out what matters." Took the smoothness out of Pierce's face for just a second. Madeline's smile faded. She looked, once more around the shop, at the pipe, the parts, the old map, the stains in the concrete, and the open bay door framing the expensive car behind her. When she spoke again, she had lowered the temperature of every word. "You may want to think carefully before making this difficult." "I have," anger in his voice. That seemed to bother her more than anger would have. Madeline turned toward the car. Pierce stayed half a step behind, slow enough to take one last look at the posted permits beside the office, the inspection tags, the file boxes beneath the map. Caleb saw him looking. Caleb said nothing. At the car door, Madeline paused. "Pierce," she said, not quite softly enough to keep Caleb from hearing, "see what the county has on this property." Pierce nodded once, already opening the folder again. Caleb remained in the bay doorway as the black car pulled out of the yard and rolled back toward the county road. Rose behind it, thin and pale, drifting across the old pipe stacked by the fence. Inside the shop, the map on the wall did not move. But Caleb looked at it longer than he had that morning. By the next morning, the insult had turned into paper. Caleb found the first envelope wedged halfway under the shop door, before he had even switched on the compressor. It was thick, county-stamped, and too carefully folded to be ordinary mail. He picked it up, stood in the dim bay with his thumb under the flap, and read it once without moving. A property review had been requested. Operating permits would be checked. Storage conditions in the yard would be evaluated. Environmental compliance and land use would all be placed under review. Before the next county meeting, there was no threat in the words. That made them worse. Caleb set the letter on the workbench, beside the notebook he had closed the day before. The old map still hung on the wall, the pencil lines and oil marker marks, running under the clear plastic like veins under skin. He looked from the letter to the map and back again. Pierce had moved fast. Near noon, Another call came in from a ranch south of the shop. Then, another. By the third call, Caleb stopped wiping his hands and listened without interrupting. "They're saying we'll have to switch over," the man on the line said. "Commercial water. New service. New rates. They said it's because the old access lines can't be verified." Caleb asked who had sent the notice. "The county packet came through yesterday." There was a development letter attached. "Looked like lawyer talk to me." Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "Keep the paper. Don't throw anything away." He said it again on the next call. Then again, afternoon. He was at Rosa Delgado's place, standing in the hard shade beside a dry equipment shed, while she held a folded notice in both hands. Her ranch was not big, not polished, the sort of place that showed well on brochures. But the fence lines were mended, the troughs were clean, and every patch of land looked worked by someone who paid attention. Rosa did not greet him with small talk. "Italy wanted it on commercial water by the end of the transition period," she said. "You know what that will cost?" Caleb took the notice and scanned it. The language was careful. "Service modernization. Unverified historical access. Temporary review. Future compliance." He had seen enough paperwork to know when a sentence had been built to hide the fist inside it. "They can't make that stick unless the old line is considered abandoned," he said. Rosa gave a short, bitter laugh. "Then I guess they're trying to call us abandoned while we're fire standing right here." Caleb looked toward the low pasture beyond her shed. The line that fed her place did not announce itself from the surface. Most of the old water system did not. It lived under dirt, under caliche, under memory. People who had never fixed a pump in the heat could look at that land and see nothing but empty ground. "Do you have anything old?" he asked. "Meeting notes, service papers, repair slips. Anything showing access to the well line." Rosa's expression changed. "Not hope yet. Something more guarded. My husband kept boxes," she said. "I kept them because I couldn't stand throwing away his handwriting." He led him to a shelf in the shed and pulled down a weathered storage box. Inside were receipts, feed records, old county mail, and folded papers softened at the creases. Caleb did not rush her. He stood beside the work table, while she sorted through years of ordinary survival. Finally, she slid a thin packet toward him. "This one mentions the shared access point. I don't know if it matters." Caleb read the top page. By enough, not by itself. But it was not nothing. "It matters," he said. Rosa watched his face. "You really think they can take the water out from under us? Think they can make it expensive enough that some folks give up before they know what they signed away?" Her jaw tightened, and for the first time that day, her anger lost its sharp edge and became fear. Caleb folded the packet carefully and handed it back. "Make a copy. Keep the original. I'll come by tonight if I need to look again. You're going to fight them?" He did not answer right away. Until that moment, he had still been thinking like a man protecting his shop, his permits, his yard, his right to keep the doors open. But Rosa's notice lay on the table between them. Behind it were every small ranch that could not afford a lawyer, every old line no one had bothered to draw cleanly on new paper. "I'm going to find out what left out," he said. That evening, Caleb brought Earl Pritchard to the shop. Earl moved slowly, not weakly. He had the kind of age that seemed built out of weather and stubbornness. He came through the bay door, took one look at the county letter on the bench, and shook his head before touching it. "Papermen," he said. "Always think water starts where their forms begin." Caleb pulled the old pressure logs from the lower shelf. The books smelled of dust and dry cardboard. Pages were in his handwriting, some in Earl's, some in the blocky marks of men who had worked the line before either of them owned much of anything. He laid them open under the map light. "I need the old access point," Caleb said. "Not the one they put in the newer survey. The one under the yard." Earl's eyes narrowed. He looked at the map on the wall, but did not step closer right away. "That line was never meant to be pretty, but was meant to keep water moving. Can you still read it?" Earl gave him a look. "I can read my own marks." For the next hour, the two men worked without raising their voices. Caleb pulled notebooks. Earl tapped dates, initials, pressure readings, and old service codes with one bent finger. Rose's packet sat on the edge of the bench, weighted by a socket so the fan would not move it. Again and again, the pieces almost met. A reading from Rose's line, valve mark near the yard, a service note about shared access, a repair entry from a summer when half the county had been dry. Each one alone could be brushed aside. Together, they began to form a shape. Caleb took the grease pencil from the coffee can and lifted the plastic sheet covering the wall map. He followed one old mark, then another. Earl stood behind him, quiet now. There, Earl said. Caleb stopped. For a faded service line, almost hidden by a newer mark, was a small black slash beside the shopyard. Not a property mark, not a repair note. An access mark. Caleb traced it lightly with the pencil, pulled the pressure log closer, and found the matching entry. The same symbol, the same line. The same old route running under the yard and out toward the ranches. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Felt different around Caleb then. The clutter, the pipe, the shelves, the boxes, the map, they had not changed. But what they meant had. This was not just the place he was trying to keep, It was the place they had to pass through. If the old water line was ever going to be proven alive, Caleb set both hands on the edge of the bench. The county letter sat to his left. Rose's copied packet sat to his right. Feel. The old pressure log lay open in front of him. He had found the direction of the truth, but not yet the paper strong enough to make the county listen. The next morning, Caleb carried the old pressure log into the county building with both hands. He had wrapped the book in brown paper before leaving the shop, not because it was fragile, because too many of its pages had already survived of men who treated old records like trash. Rose's copied packet was tucked under his arm. The marked map had been rolled inside a cardboard tube, its edges held with rubber bands, punched to look at. It did not shine. It did not carry a lawyer's letterhead. But it was what he had. The records room sat at the back of the building, past a narrow hallway where the air felt dry and used up. Helen Marbury looked up from behind the counter when Caleb came in. She had the careful face of someone who had spent years saying no politely and yes only when she could defend it. "You're here about the access line," she said. Caleb nodded. "I need to find the old easement record." Helen's eyes moved to the log in his hands, then to the tube under his arm. "I saw the request note. Mr. Langford's office submitted a development file last week. Packet says the historical access could not be verified. That's why I'm here." She hesitated. It was not refusal. It was the pause of a person measuring how much trouble truth might bring into a quiet room. "The newer files won't help you," she said. "If what you're looking for exists, it would be in the older storage. Can we look?" Helen glanced toward the front of the building, as if the hallway itself might report her. He took a key from a drawer. "We can look. I can't promise what's there." In the back storage room, boxes sat on metal shelves, labeled in faded ink and old county shorthand. Caleb did not rush her. Helen pulled one box, then another, reading labels under her breath. He stood beside the table, with the pressure log open, matching what Earl had remembered against what the county might still admit existed. After nearly an hour, Helen stopped at a drawer of old film records. She slid one reel into a viewer and turned the knob slowly. Pale images flickered across the small screen. Surveys, signatures, property notes, lines drawn by hands long gone. He stopped turning. Caleb leaned in, but did not touch the machine. Helen read silently first. Her mouth tightened. Then she looked at the rolled map on the table. "This may be it," she said. "Maybe?" It names a maintenance access point, tied to the shared well line. The location description is old, but it corresponds to the south yard of your property. She looked back at the screen, then a sound. This should have been cross-referenced in the development packet. Caleb did not answer. His hands were steady, but something in his chest had gone tight and hot. He had not come looking for victory, fear in a sound. He had come looking for one piece of paper strong enough to keep people from being erased by cleaner paper. Helen printed the image, stamped the copy, and placed it in a plain folder. "I'll have to bring this into the meeting record. Will that be enough?" It will be enough to make them answer questions. By afternoon, the hallway, outside the meeting room, had filled with people who did not usually spend their days waiting on county chairs. Rosa stood near the wall, arms folded, her notice folded small in one hand. Few ranch owners stood with her, quiet and watchful. Pierce arrived in a pressed jacket carrying a neat folder and wearing the confidence of a man who believed mess could be defeated by arrangement. Madeline came in after him. He saw Caleb near the door and held his gaze for half a second longer than she had at the shop. She looked composed but not careless. She knew now that he had brought something more than stubbornness. Pierce leaned toward her and spoke low. Caleb could not hear the words, but he saw the shape of the moment. Reassurance, control. The same smooth current that had carried the whole project forward. Inside, the room was plain and bright. Caleb sat with the rolled map across his knees. Rosa sat behind him. Helen took her place near the side table with the folder from the records room. When the development issue was called, Pierce stood first. He described the resort plan in calm, useful language: improved access, economic benefit, modernized water service, unverified historical systems, theming. He made the old line sound like a rumor, and the ranch families sound like people resisting progress they did not understand. Then he turned slightly toward Caleb's side of the room. O'Rourke has produced shop notes and informal markings, Pierce said. We respect local memory, of course, but land use decisions cannot rest on grease pencil records. A few people shifted in their chairs. Caleb stood, raised his voice. He placed Rosa's packet on the table first, then the old pressure log opened to the marked page. Last, he unrolled the map. Its edges curled until he set the log and packet at two corners to hold it flat. These aren't memories, he said. They're maintenance records. Pierce gave a small smile. From your shop, from the line. Caleb pointed to the old service mark near his yard, then to the pressure reading in the log, then to the reference in Rosa's packet. He moved in order, one piece at a time. No speech, no accusation, connection after connection, until the room began to follow the path under the ground. Rosa leaned forward. Madeline's expression changed slowly, not enough for most people to see. But Caleb saw it. He had come prepared to watch him defend a personal attachment. Instead, he was showing her a system. Pierce interrupted once. Again, none of this establishes a recorded easement. Helen stood before Caleb could respond. The room quieted. I need to add something to the record, she said. She carried the folder to the front table and opened it. Her voice was careful, but it did not shake. The older storage contains a filmed copy of a recorded maintenance easement for the shared well line. The access point described corresponds with the south yard of Mr. Rourke's property. Pierce did not move. Bean placed the stamped copy beside Caleb's map. It appears this record was not included in the development file submitted for review. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the ceiling vents. Caleb looked down at the map, spread across the table. The black slash beside his shop yard no longer looked like a private mark made in an old hand. It looked like what it had always been, a doorway to water, hidden in plain sight. Helen turned her head slowly toward Pierce. Rosa let out the breath she had been holding. No one asked Caleb whether he was protecting junk anymore. No one asked why he had refused to sell. The room had understood, all at once, that he had not been standing in the way of progress. He had been standing over the place where the water still had a way through. Helen's stamped copy remained on the table, between the map and Pierce's unopened folder. Every face in the room turned toward him, and Madeline, waiting for an answer. The silence in the meeting room did not end with an apology. It ended with Helen gathering the stamped copy from the table, sliding it into the county folder, and saying that the file would have to be reviewed before any further approval could move forward. She said it plainly, without drama, but the effect was immediate. Pierce's folder stayed closed and did not look at him again until the room had begun to empty. A few days later, Caleb returned to the county building with the same careful caution he had carried into the hearing. He had learned not to trust relief too early. A truth spoken in public still had to survive paper, signatures, and people trying to soften what it meant. Helen met him in a small office near the records room. Phone. Rosa sat beside the window, both hands folded around her notice, as if she still expected someone to take it back. Madeline sat across the table with a clean folder in front of her. Pierce was there too, but not beside her. Fed enough before anyone spoke. The county had opened a review of the development file. The old access record had been added back into the official documents. The shared well line could not be treated as abandoned. French families could not be forced into commercial water, as if their old line had never existed. Rosa lowered her head when she heard that. She did not cry. She only pressed the folded notice flat against her lap, smoothing it once, then again, until the paper stopped shaking in her hands. Pierce tried to speak carefully. He said the omission had been a misunderstanding, a gap in historical records, process issue that had grown larger than it needed to be. He did not look at Caleb when he said it. Helen looked up from the file. The record was available, she said. It was not included. That was all. Accusation louder than necessary. No speech. Just the sentence that closed the door. Madeline's face tightened, not with surprise anymore, but with the cost of understanding. She had come into Caleb's shops seeing a dirty yard, poor man's, stubbornness, and a problem that money could move. Now the project she had worked so hard to control would survive, only if it bowed to the thing she had dismissed, being a sound. Pierce was removed from the project before the meeting ended. The county review would continue without him, and his handling of the file would be examined to the Pywell, responsible for licensing and land records. He left with his folder under one arm, smaller than he had looked in Caleb's shop, smaller than he had looked in the hearing room. This time, no one followed him out. Madeline stayed seated. He opened the clean folder and turned it toward Caleb. Inside was a revised agreement. The entrance road would move. The south yard of Caleb's shop would remain untouched. The shared well line would be marked and protected in the project plan. Access for maintenance would be written plainly, not tucked into language only lawyers could love. There is also a service contract, she said. Her voice had lost its polished ease. For maintenance on the water system, both the old ranch line and the new property, if you're willing to take it. Caleb did not touch the folder at first. Rosa looked at him, but she did not push. Helen waited with her pen resting above the file. Madeline's hands were still, though Caleb could see the strain in them. You don't get to make this quiet, Caleb said. Madeline held his gaze. If I sign, he continued, the water access stays in writing. Every ranch tied to that line gets a copy. Any change comes through the county record before work starts. And my shop is not a temporary convenience for your project. Dylan looked down at the agreement, then back at him. Put it in. It already is, Caleb said. I'm saying it out loud so nobody forgets what the paper means. For the first time since the hearing, and nodded without trying to control the room. Understood, Caleb read every page. He did not hurry for anyone. When a sentence felt too smooth, he asked Helen to mark it. When a condition needed plain wording, he waited until it was changed. Madeline accepted each correction. Not graciously, exactly, but honestly enough. At last, Caleb signed. Rosa let out a breath and smiled at the table, not at any one person. Fitted to sound. The paper in front of her had changed shape. It was no longer a warning. It was proof that the water under their land still had a name, and that name had been written where no one could pretend not to see it. That afternoon, Caleb returned to the shop alone. The yard looked the same from the road. Old pipe, pump housings, parts waiting under the heat. Nothing about it had become pretty. Nothing had been polished for people passing by. Yes. But the place felt different when Caleb stepped out of his truck. The air was lighter, as if the ground itself had stopped holding its breath. He unlocked the bay door and walked inside. The old map still hung on the wall, uncrossed and worn thin at the edges. The pressure log lay closed beneath it. Caleb set the signed agreement on the workbench and rested one hand on top of it. For a while, he simply stood there, beaten them by becoming louder. He had not saved the shop by begging. to be respected. He had followed the line under the dirt until it led back to the truth, then made the truth stand where everyone could see it. Their evening, Rosa drove up with a small can of paint and a brush. She did not ask permission. She only held them out and said, "That sign out front has needed help for years." Caleb looked at the faded board above the bay door. The old letters were still readable, but barely. Sun, dust, and time had worked on them, the way they worked on everything. He took the brush. By the time the light softened over the yard, the sign had been painted fresh. Not fancy, new enough to pretend the shop had never been worn. Just clear enough that anyone turning off the county road could read it without slowing down too late. Rosa stood by her truck, looking at it. "That'll do," she said. Caleb nodded. When she left, he stayed outside a little longer. The first evening breeze moved across the yard, carrying dust past the stacked pipe and the closed bay door. Under the ground, the old line ran where it had always run. The shop stood where it belonged, no longer mistaken for something in the way.